From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
Are you arguing, then, that the president's decision in that regard is unreviewable?
Yes.
The Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals hears arguments on whether to restore President Trump's executive order banning people from 7 majority Muslim nations from entering the United States. While the government says Trump's action should not be reviewable, the Solicitor General of Washington State urged the court to serve as a check on the executive branch.
It has always been the judicial branch's role to say what the law is and to serve as a check on abuses by the executive branch. That judicial role has never been more important in recent memory than it is today. But the president is asking this court to abdicate that role here, to reinstate the executive order without meaningful judicial review, and to throw this country back into chaos. The court should decline that invitation.
We'll speak with the ACLU attorney, Lee Gallant, who helped bring the first case challenging Trump's Muslim ban, then to Standing Rock. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers gives the green light to complete the Dakota Access Oil Pipeline. Indigenous water protectors say the fight is not over.
Theoretically, drilling underneath the Missouri River could start any time. This is an emergency situation.
We'll speak with Standing Rock Sioux activist Chase Ironeyes, Dallas Goldtooth of the Indigenous Environmental Network. But first, Dave Archambault, chair of the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has announced it'll green-light the final phase of construction for the Dakota Access Pipeline, prompting Indigenous water protectors and their allies to call for a last stand against the $3.8 billion project. In a letter to Congress, Acting Army Secretary Robert Speer said the Corps will cancel an environmental impact study of the Dakota Access Pipeline and will grant an easement today, allowing Energy Transfer Partners to drill under Lake Wahe on the Missouri River. The Corps also said it would suspend a customary 14-day waiting period following its order, meaning the company could immediately begin boring a tunnel for the final 1.5 miles of pipe. The Standing Rock Sioux Tribe has promised a legal fight. Tribal Council Chair Dave Archambault said in a statement, quote, "As Native peoples, we have been knocked down again, but we will get back up. We will rise above the greed and corruption that's plagued our people since first contact. We call on the Native nations of the United States to stand together, unite, and fight back," he said. Other Indigenous water protectors and their allies have vowed to take direct action to stop the construction of the drill pad on the west bank of the Missouri River, less than a mile north of the Standing Rock Reservation. Activists are also planning solidarity actions in cities across North America and beyond. We'll have more on the fight against the Dakota Access Pipeline later in the broadcast. Among those we'll be speaking to, the Standing Rock Sioux chairman, Dave Archambault. The Seattle City Council has voted unanimously to divest $3 billion from Wells Fargo over the bank's backing of the Dakota Access Pipeline. The divestment legislation was first introduced by City Council member Kshama Sawant in response to the demand issued by Indigenous water protectors that individual cities and Native American nations cut ties with Wells Fargo and other banks that are investing in the pipeline. The Muckleshoot Tribe in Seattle, the Nez Perce Tribe in Idaho, and the Mi'kmaq Band of Ojibwe in Minnesota have all committed to divesting from Wells Fargo. On Capitol Hill, the Senate has confirmed billionaire Betsy DeVos for Education Secretary after an historic tie-breaking vote from Vice President Mike Pence. DeVos's nomination has sparked widespread outrage and resistance among education advocates who are concerned DeVos will move to defund and privatize public education. DeVos is a longtime backer of charter schools and vouchers for private and religious schools. She considers education an industry. She's called the public school system a dead end. DeVos's confirmation comes after Senate Democrats launched a 24-hour protest debate in efforts to stall the vote as they tried to find a third Republican senator to vote against her. On Tuesday in New York City, public school students walked out of class in protest against President Trump reacted to confirmation of Betsy DeVos. This is high school student Tim Markbrighter.
So just now, actually just a few minutes ago, there was a tie in the vote for Betsy DeVos, and so Mike Pence got the last vote because of the tie, and she got confirmed, obviously, because of his conservative agenda, which, I mean, personally, I go to public school, and I think I value the education I get so much, and I'm just stunned that this country, after everything that's going on, after all the division, that this billionaire woman who never even went to a public school got confirmed.
In a highly unusual move, Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren was silenced during a Senate debate Tuesday over the confirmation of Alabama Senator Jeff Sessions for Attorney General, after Senator Warren read a 1986 letter written by Coretta Scott King, who is then opposing Sessions for a federal judgeship. This is presiding officer, Montana Republican Senator Steve Daines, interrupting Senator Warren.
It has been a long uphill struggle to keep alive the vital legislation that protects the most fundamental right to vote. A person who has exhibited so much hostility to the enforcement of those laws.
The senator is reminded that it is a violation of Rule 19 of the standing rules of the Senate to impute to another senator or senators any conduct or motive unworthy or becoming a senator.
Mr. President, I don't think I quite understand. I'm reading a letter from Coretta Scott King to the Judiciary Committee from 1986 that was admitted into the record. I'm simply reading what she wrote.
Senator Warren was then allowed to continue reading the letter, in which Coretta Scott King writes, quote, "The irony of Mr. Sessions' nomination is that if confirmed, he will be given a life tenure for doing with a federal prosecution what the local sheriffs accomplished 20 years ago with clubs and cattle prods. I believe his confirmation would have a devastating effect on not only the judicial system in Alabama, but also on the progress we've made toward fulfilling my husband's dream." Those the words, again, of Coretta Scott King to the Senate in 1986. After reading the letter, Senator Warren continued speaking, but she was again interrupted, this time by Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell.
Mr. President.
The Majority Leader.
The senators impugn the motives and conduct of our colleague from Alabama as warned by the chair. Senator Warren, quote, said Senator Sessions has used the awesome power of his office to chill the free exercise of the vote by black citizens. I call the senator to order under the provisions of Rule 19.
Mr. President.
The Senator from Massachusetts.
Mr. President, I'm surprised that the words of Coretta Scott King are not suitable for debate in the United States Senate.
Senator Warren is now prohibited from speaking for the remainder of the debate over Sessions' confirmation after the Senate passed a party-line rebuke against her. Her silencing sparked immediate outrage on social media and from other senators. This is California Senator Kamala Harris.
Mr. President, the suggestion that reciting the words of the great Coretta Scott King would invoke Rule 19 and force Senator Warren to sit down and be silent is outrageous. I move that the senator from Massachusetts be permitted to proceed in order.
Kamala Harris is the only African-American woman senator. Donald Trump's pick for Labor Secretary, Andrew Puzder, is facing increasing criticism over his admission that he hired an undocumented housekeeper. Puzder says he and his wife employed an undocumented housekeeper for a number of years, then fired her after learning she didn't have U.S. work documents. He also says they provided her help in obtaining U.S. documentation. Puzder is the second of Trump's cabinet nominees who's acknowledged hiring an undocumented worker. The first was Commerce Secretary nominee billionaire Wilbur Ross. Similar similar practices have led to the rejection of past cabinet nominees, including 2 of President Clinton's nominees for Attorney General in 1993. Meanwhile, the Washington Post reports Puzdur's chain restaurants, Carl's Jr. and Hardee's, have been the subject of multiple Labor Department investigations over wage theft, which have led the companies to pay nearly $150,000 in back pay to workers and more than $80,000 in penalties. The companies have also been cited with more than 30 health and safety violations. Puzdur is also facing criticism over allegations of domestic abuse by his ex-wife, who even went on Oprah in disguise to speak about domestic violence. Puzdur's ex-wife, Lisa Firestein, has now told senators she regrets appearing on Oprah years ago and that, quote, "Andy and I have since forgiven one another for the hurt we caused each other," unquote. Meanwhile, yet another one of Trump's cabinet nominees, Oklahoma Attorney General Scott Pruitt, is facing criticism in a lawsuit by the ACLU of Oklahoma, which accuses Pruitt of violating the state's Open Records Act by refusing to turn over documents related to his office's communications with coal, oil, and gas companies, including Koch Industries. Pruitt has been nominated to head the Environmental Protection Agency, despite having a long history of being an ally to the fossil fuel industry and having sued the EPA 14 times. His office has acknowledged having thousands of emails related to the records request, but it's failed to turn over a single one after more than 2 years. The Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals heard arguments Tuesday on whether to restore President Donald Trump's executive order banning people from Iraq, Syria, Iran, Sudan, Libya, Somalia, and Yemen from entering the United States. The case was brought by the states of Washington and Minnesota. The emergency hearing came just days after a judge in Seattle imposed a nationwide temporary restraining order on the ban. On Tuesday, 3 judges on the Ninth Circuit heard oral arguments via telephone. 2 of the judges were appointed by Democrats, William Canby and Michelle Friedland, and one by a Republican, Richard Clifton. We'll have more on the hearing and the legal battle over Trump's Muslim ban after headlines. President Trump met Tuesday with members of the National Sheriff's Association, during which he lied about the U.S. murder rate, falsely claiming it's the highest it's been in more than 4 decades.
I'd say that in a speech, and everybody was surprised, because the press doesn't tell it like it is. It wasn't to their advantage to say that. But the murder rate is the highest it's been in, I guess, from 45 to 47 years.
In fact, the FBI says the U.S. murder rate is at one of its lowest points in the last half-century. Trump also repeatedly lied about the murder rate during the campaign. During that same meeting, President Trump also threatened to destroy the career of a Texas state senator after Sheriff Harold Evanson complained about the senator's proposed legislation.
We got a state senator in Texas that was talking about introducing legislation to require conviction before we could receive that forfeiture money.
Can you believe that?
And I told him that the cartel would build a monument to him in Mexico if he could get that legislation.
Who's the state senator? Do you want to give his name? We'll destroy his career.
Asset forfeiture is a controversial law enforcement practice where police can seize property that belongs to people suspected of crimes, even if they are never convicted. A New Yorker investigation shows local police have at times used asset forfeiture as a cash for freedom deal, in which police seize cash, cars, and homes from people who are never even charged with a crime. The proposed legislation would require people to be convicted of a crime before the police are allowed to seize their property. In international news, Yemen has withdrawn permission for the U.S. to carry out special operations ground missions amidst outrage over the Navy SEAL Team 6 raid on a Yemeni village that killed several civilians, including the 8-year-old daughter of Anwar al-Awlaki, a radical cleric and U.S. citizen who was killed in Yemen by a U.S. drone strike in 2011. The girl's grandfather, Nasser al-Awlaki, said she suffered for hours after she was shot in the neck during the January 29th raid. William Ryan Owens, a veteran member of SEAL Team 6, also died during the raid. The White House continues to claim the raid was a success. And in Japan, scientists say the radiation levels inside a damaged reactor at the Fukushima nuclear power plant are at the highest point since the nuclear plant's meltdown 6 years ago. On March 11, 2011, a massive earthquake and tsunami hit the northeast coast of Japan, killing 20,000 people. Another 160,000 people then fled the radiation at Fukushima. It was the world's worst nuclear disaster since Chernobyl. Experts are calling the radiation levels now detected at the plant unimaginable. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The Ninth U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals heard arguments Tuesday on whether to restore President Donald Trump's executive order banning people from Iraq, Syria, Iran, Sudan, Libya, Somalia, and Yemen from entering the United States. The case was brought by the states of Washington and Minnesota. The emergency hearing came just days after a judge in Seattle imposed a nationwide temporary restraining order on the ban. On Tuesday, 3 judges in the Ninth Circuit heard oral arguments via telephone. 2 of the judges were appointed by Democrats, William Canby and Michelle Friedland, and 1 by a Republican, Richard Clifton. Justice Department lawyer August Flenchie argued Trump's executive order was constitutional.
Under Section 212F, Congress has expressly authorized the President to suspend entry of classes of aliens when it is necessary or when otherwise it would be detrimental to the interests of the United States. That's what the President did here. And the President's determination that a 90-day pause was needed for the 7 countries at issue here in order to ensure adequate standards, and that's language from the order, for visa screening was plainly constitutional. The district's court's order, which contained no assessment of the legality of the order, was in error, and we encourage the court to stay.
During his argument, the Justice Department lawyer, August Flenchie, questioned the role of the court in reviewing the president's actions.
The reason we sought immediate relief and a stay is because of the district court's decision overrides the president's national security judgment about the level of risk. And we've been talking about the level of risk that is acceptable. As soon as we are having that discussion, it should be acknowledged that the president is the official that is charged with making those judgments. I'd also like to
So are we back to you? Are you arguing then that the president's decision in that regard is unreviewable?
Yes.
Noah Purcell, the Solicitor General for the state of Washington, said it was the court's role to serve as a check on the executive branch.
It has always been the judicial branch's role to say what the law is and to serve as a check on abuses by the executive branch. That judicial role has never been more important in recent memory than it is today. But the president is asking this court to abdicate that role here, to reinstate the executive order without meaningful judicial review, and to throw this country back into chaos.
To talk more about the legal fight against Donald Trump's executive order, we're joined by Lee Gallant. He's an ACLU attorney who presented the first challenge to Trump's executive order on immigration. His argument resulted in a nationwide injunction. Well, it's great to have you with us today.
Thank you for having me.
What do you make of the court hearing yesterday?
You know, they were well prepared. I would say, listening to it, it's always difficult, you know, to predict what a court would do, but I think they asked very pointed, tough questions of the U.S. government, and in particular, they wanted to know, could they review this? Because I think that's the sort of takeaway from all this. Is the administration saying that the courts have no role? Because if the courts have no role, we're in a dangerous situation. And so I think they properly pressed the U.S. government, what's our role, and are you really saying there's no role here? And I think...
What do you mean by role?
Right, and so that they can review what the president did. There's no question that the president and Congress are entitled to some deference when they act in this area. But the U.S. government is coming dangerously close to saying, if the president says it's okay, then it's okay. And I think what you've seen from the panel last night, but also from all the courts around the country is, no. The courts have the final word on what the Constitution means, and the Constitution is ultimately paramount. And that, I think, is what's been heartening about what's happened since the executive order. We went in within 24 hours of the executive order being passed, and by Saturday night, one day later, we had a nationwide injunction from Judge Donnelly in Brooklyn, and I think it gave everyone something to rally around, that the courts were going to play their traditional role. And so that's what I think has been heartening about this last 10 days.
Let's go back to the hearing. Judges William Canby, he was a Carter appointee, and Judge Richard Clifton, a George W. Bush appointee, questioned Justice Department Attorney August Flenchie on what oversight presidential orders can be subject to. This first is Judge Canby.
Could the president simply say in the order, we're not going to let any Muslims in?
That's not what the order does here.
I know.
And the order relies on...
I know.
Sorry, Your Honor.
Could he do that? Could he do that?
That's not what the order does.
Would anybody be able to challenge that?
That's not what the order does here. I do really feel... I do want to get to one key point.
Well, we'd like to get to an answer to that question, because it speaks back to the standing issue. If the order said Muslims cannot be admitted, would anybody have standing to challenge that?
I think Mandel and Din give a route to make a constitutional challenge if there were such an order. It would be by a U.S. citizen with a connection to someone seeking entry. This is a far cry from that situation.
Can you comment on this, Lee Gallant?
Yeah, the administration is trying to say, look, this is not a Muslim ban. The word Muslim doesn't appear, or Islam doesn't appear in the order. Well, that's not what the courts do. The courts aren't that easily fooled. What they do is look behind the face of the document. That's standard Supreme Court law, because otherwise you could have a state, the federal government, the president doing something with real discriminatory intent and then simply take out a few words. And I think that's what, the administration ultimately was caught on that when former Mayor Rudy Giuliani said, well, I told them this is how to do it.
Actually, I want to go to Rudolph Giuliani. He was speaking on Fox when he made this comment.
To tell you the whole history of it. So when he first announced it, he said Muslim ban. He called me up. He said, put a commission together. Show me the right way to do it legally. I put a commission together with Judge Mukasey, with Congressman McCall, Pete King, a whole group of other very expert lawyers on this. And what we did was we focused on, instead of religion, danger. The areas of the world that create danger for us, which is a factual basis, not a religious basis. Perfectly legal, perfectly sensible, and that's what the ban is based on. It's not based on religion. It's based on places where there are substantial evidence that people are sending terrorists into our country.
And this is December 2015, not a surrogate for Donald Trump, but Donald Trump himself calling for a total and complete shutdown of the entry of Muslims to the United States.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on. We have no choice. We have no choice.
So these statements might impact the court's ruling. Let's go to another clip from the hearing. Judge Clifton asking Department of Justice lawyer August Flenchie about anti-Muslim statements attributed to Trump and his advisors during his campaign. We hear first from the Justice Department attorney.
It is extraordinary for a court to enjoin the president's national security determination based on some newspaper articles, and that's what has happened here. That is not that is a very troubling second guessing of the national security decision made by the president. And the notion that we are going to go back into court and
stop. This is Judge Clifton. Do you deny that, in fact, the statements attributed to then candidate Trump and to his political advisors, and most recently Mr. Giuliani, do you deny that those statements were made?
Judge Clifton, I would note that Judge Robart himself said that he wasn't going to look at campaign statements. I do, and I think that what
you see, that's a different point. I mean, I understand the argument they shouldn't be given much weight, but when you say we shouldn't be looking at newspaper articles, we're all on the fast track here. Both sides have told us it's moving too fast. Either those kind of statements were made or they're not. Now, if they were made, but they were made not to be a serious policy principle, I can understand that. But if they were made, it is potential evidence. It is a basis for an argument. So I just want to make sure I know what's on the table.
Well, those are in the record, but I think my point is a little narrower, that in the expedited procedure of a TRO, taking this extraordinary action of halting this order that the president determined was in the national security interests of the United States is an unwise course, and it should be stayed.
So that's the Department Justice lawyer, August Flenchie. Lee Gallant, if you can explain, because he makes the point, only look at what's on four corners of the document. Don't look at the campaign. Don't look at what people say.
That's wrong. You know, the Supreme Court has said over and over, you can look beyond the four corners of the document if there is evidence of discriminatory intent. And we're not talking about a newspaper article. We're talking about then candidate Trump's own statements, and not just one statement. If there was one offhand statement, you know, that's one thing, but it's over and over and over. And I think everyone knew what he intended with this executive order. The other thing I would point out that's getting lost is the order on its face discriminates among religions, not by denomination, but it does talk about minority religions and majority religions, and even that is prohibited by the Establishment Clause. The government is not supposed to be in the business of choosing between religions, particular religions, or even minority and majority. And after the executive order was signed, he very clearly said the minority religion provision was intended to benefit Christians. And in this country and under our Constitution, we don't favor one religion over another. I mean, that's the most bedrock principle in our country.
So explain where this goes right now. They say they're going to make a decision. It could be handed down today, tomorrow, the next day. What does it mean? What are the possible choices these judges can make?
Right. So one thing is they can just simply affirm the district court and say, look, we're going to keep everything on hold while this case moves forward, because this is ultimately just temporary relief. Then the U.S. government will have the opportunity to go to the Supreme Court if they choose. They'd be on a very fast track. I don't know. Everyone is assuming they will. I don't know that they will when serious lawyers look at this and see how little time there is, because the case is moving on a very fast track back in district court. If it's overturned, if the stay is overturned, Washington could go to the Supreme Court. You know, whether either side will remains to be seen. But ultimately, the case has to go forward, just like our case in New York, our case in Maryland, the ACLU's cases, and other cases. Ultimately, we're going to have to reach the merits of all this, because this is all preliminary skirmishes to keep the status quo. What this is all about is ultimately who's going to be harmed more during the interim when the case is going forward. I think it's very clear with refugees abroad who are in real danger and all of the other harms that befell people, that if you keep the executive order in place, people are going to be really harmed. The U.S. government could not come in with a countervailing harm, especially because all these people have been vetted. I mean, in our case, it was an Iraqi who helped our U.S. military.
This is the first case you brought racing to the Brooklyn court.
Exactly.
It was two men that you were representing.
And on behalf of a whole class nationwide. And those were people who helped our U.S. military. But the government's putting out this narrative that we don't know who's coming in. But these were people who actually helped put their lives at stake for our U.S. military. And then all of a sudden they're landing here and they're saying President Trump doesn't want you, even though you put your lives at stake, at risk.
So President Trump clearly is not used to having people review his decisions as CEO of the Trump empire. So his first reaction was to lash out at the judge, call him a so-called judge. The significance of this very quickly, Lee?
Yeah. The rule of law is critical. The president has to respect the courts. I mean, that may be the overriding issue here. That's bigger than any particular civil liberties issue.
Mm-hmm. And clearly, there is trouble in the administration. You have the lawyer, Flenchy, being replaced, coming into this at the very last minute, in the hours before he argued this, in this very odd telephone call where one of the judges was in Hawaii, and another judge. Everyone was in a different place, and this was argued over the phone. He comes in, and when he's seeing he might not be doing so well at the end, he says, well, for one thing, at least don't allow people who've never been in the United States to come into the United States if you're going to make a partial decision. What about that?
Yeah, a fallback argument. I don't think it's possible to sort of split it up now, especially how quickly things are moving, how the administration would actually implement such a division between people. And everyone's being harmed. I don't think that's a wise course, but you can see that the government fell back on something, realized maybe they weren't going to get everything they wanted, and tried at the last minute some sort of fallback minor.
Now, let me read you a tweet that just came out. Donald Trump didn't respond to the hearing last night, but he did say, if the U.S. does not win this case, as it so obviously should, we can never have the security and safety to which we are entitled. Politics, exclamation point. And then he tweeted, I will be speaking at 9 a.m. today to police chiefs and sheriffs, and we'll be discussing the horrible, dangerous, and wrong decision, and he moves on.
Yeah. We would prefer not to see the president say to the courts, if you do this, the whole country's security is on you. I mean, I think the courts are doing what they are supposed to do, and looking at the Constitution, they are doing their best, and they are a co-equal branch of the government.
So can you go back in time to Friday, January 27th, what you were doing over at the ACLU and where you ended up that day?
Yeah, so we had a call from 7:30 to 9:30 about the executive order, which had just come out at 5 o'clock. We were hopeful that the people en route to the U.S. would be allowed in, and we were preparing a challenge for people who were still overseas. At 10 o'clock, I start getting a text. There may be people at JFK who are being stopped. So we gather a whole group of lawyers from Yale, from the National Immigration Law Center, and from the International Refugee Assistance Project. We stay up all night. We file a complaint on their behalf at 6 in the morning. We then spend all day trying to get the government to assure us they won't remove anybody while the case goes forward. We couldn't get those assurances. We rush in for an emergency stay at 6 p.m. Saturday night. The judge says, be down here at 7:30. I get down there, there's about 50 people, and I say, wow, that's great, 50 people on a Saturday night at the courthouse in that short notice. When I come out after arguing the case, there were 1,000 people out there. I think we're in one of those real civil rights moments where it's not just the lawyers presenting arguments in court, but it's the community and everyone rallying together, and I think that's what it's going to take.
And so what happens with your case? How is it affected by this federal hearing and the decision that will come down?
So one thing to keep in mind, especially for your listeners, is if they traveled here in reliance on the Washington order, and even if the Washington order is overturned, they're safe because of the injunction issued by Judge Donnelly in Brooklyn that says no one who reaches U.S. soil can be removed. The other thing to keep in mind is the Washington case is sort of moving ahead quickly right now, but no one knows which case is ultimately going to go first and what's going to happen in any particular case. So that's why we're moving forward with all the cases, and we are going to be on a fast track as well in New York.
So you are refiling your case?
Well, our case has never not been in the courts, and so we are moving forward. The other thing that's going on in our case is we're seeing noncompliance by the administration, and that's dangerous. Judge Donnelly very specifically said, give the plaintiffs a list of everyone who was detained and been affected by this executive order. That's 10 days ago. We still haven't got the list. So we've gone back to court and say to the court, you need to enforce this order. The administration is not complying. We need a list of people who got here and may have been coerced into waiving their rights and removed. We know of people already who were sent back against their will. Without a list from the government, we can't contact everyone and find out who knows how many people were actually sent back against their will after the case was filed.
How about the Justice Department lawyers, the government lawyers saying 100,000 visas were canceled?
Right. You know, we're in a dramatic moment here. Hopefully those people will get back their visas, but it's troubling because those people were extensively vetted. I mean, this narrative about we don't know who these people are, It's simply wrong. I mean, especially with the refugees, they are so extensively vetted that.
And finally, the explanation of this is Obama's list of 7 countries. This is not our list, President Trump said.
Right. But Obama didn't put a ban. He said we're going to do some other things with vetting. Fine. We are not against vetting, but a ban is a whole different thing.
Well, I want to thank you very much, Lee Gallant, for joining us, ACLU attorney who presented the first challenge to the executive order on immigration. His argument resulted in a nationwide injunction. This is Democracy Now! Of course, we will continue to follow this issue. We'll be back in a minute. An honor song performed for the members of the Seattle City Council after the vote to divest from Wells Fargo, a funder of the Dakota Access Pipeline. During the song, they gave the members a gift bundle with water from their river. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers said Tuesday it'll green-light the final phase of construction for the Dakota Access Pipeline, prompting indigenous-led water protectors to call for a last stand against the $3.8 billion project. In a letter to Congress, Acting Army Secretary Robert Speer said the Corps will cancel an environmental impact study of the Dakota Access Pipeline and will grant an easement today, allowing Energy Transfer Partners to drill under Lake Wahe on the Missouri River. The Army Corps also said it would suspend a customary 14-day waiting period following its order, meaning the company could immediately begin boring a tunnel for the final 1.5 miles of pipe. In response, the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe promised a legal fight. Tribal Chair Dave Archambault said in a statement, quote, "As Native peoples, we've been knocked down again, but we'll get up. We will rise above the greed and corruption that has plagued our people since first contact. We'll call on the Native nations of the United States to stand together, unite, and fight back," unquote. Dave Archambault is asking allies to protest at state capitals and at a march on Washington on March 10th. Other indigenous water protectors and their allies have vowed to take direct action to stop construction at the drill pad on the west bank of the Missouri River, less than a mile north of the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation. Meanwhile, activists are planning solidarity actions in cities across North America and beyond. To begin, we're joined by Dave Archambault, chairman of the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe. He's currently in Washington, D.C. Welcome to Democracy Now! Can you respond to the word that just came down yesterday?
Amy, this is something that we wasn't thinking, or we didn't think was going to happen to yesterday. We had a status conference with Judge Brosberg, and Judge asked the Department of Justice when a decision was going to be rendered, and the Corps of Engineers said they were reviewing the process, and most likely be Friday or maybe next week. So I made plans to come out to D.C. and try one more time, one last attempt to meet with the Army Corps of Engineers before they made a decision, and also to try to meet with the White House. I had a meeting set up with Intergovernmental Affairs, William Kirkland. As soon as I landed, I got notice, and it was just disheartening. You know, I just canceled my meeting with the White House because obviously they're not willing to listen. They don't want to hear from the tribe, which is unfortunate. And this is something that we were so thankful that the previous administration at least took time and looked at all angles and all perspectives of this argument.
So can you explain what is happening today? The easement being granted, what does this mean? Can Dakota Access Pipeline, the Energy Transfer Partners, which owns the pipeline, begin drilling today?
Well, they don't have the easement yet, Amy. And if they're going to get the easement, I would wait to see whether or not the notice to Congress is going to be waived or not. So every time something comes out in the news, it appears that people take it as definite. But we always stop and take a look, and we're going to start working with the Congress and say, don't waive the 14-day period. Give us time to inform Congress of what's going on and what has happened. And what's happening is our treaty rights are violated, our human rights are violated, our legal law, the laws are being violated, the federal laws are being violated, and this is just a complete disregard for the environment, for what keeps people safe, and it's just unfortunate, sad, but we need to get that out there. We need to be heard by decision makers, and it seems like the process is trying to expedite and facilitate something that's unlawful.
So in the letter, your letter of the Standing Rock Tribe, it says, next step for tribe and allies, the tribe will challenge any easement decision on the grounds that the environmental impact statement was wrongfully terminated. So President Obama said that the environmental impact statement should be done and talked about the possibility of rerouting. This whole process has now been canceled. There will be no environmental impact statement?
Yeah, see, what we were asking for was what would the impact be to our nation if there was an oil spill? And that's what the environmental impact statement would do, is how is it going to impact our people, our culture, our heritage? And that was never looked at. And environmental assessment does not look at that. When it comes to indigenous people and the encroachment to indigenous people's rights. So we have been asking for that, and for once, this government said, okay, let's pump on the brakes and let's do an environmental impact statement and see what the study shows. How will it impact tribal lands, treaty rights, human rights, the environment for this nation? What will that do to them? So it was a progress for something that we've been asking for, and for the administration, or not even the administration, for the federal government to say, we're going to do this, and then come back and say, we're not going to do this because of Donald Trump. And Donald Trump is being, he's a puppet. I would say he's a puppet because the Koch brothers are running this country now. They feed all of Congress, not all, the majority of Congress, and this president is taking direction from corporate America, from the Koch brothers, and it's something that this country has to start to realize, and it falls in line with all the other executive orders that he's given. And so there's going to be a trend here, and we've seen it in the first 2 weeks. It started, and I don't think any leader of a nation should make decisions without hearing all perspectives. And that if you're not doing that, you're surrogate, and you're going to base your decision off of who's telling you what to do.
You haven't spoken with the Trump administration?
No, I haven't. And I set up a meeting for today just to meet with Intergovernmental Affairs. We've been trying ever since the election, and no one would listen to it. No one will meet with us. Finally, we got a meeting. It was scheduled for Monday this week, and then it got pushed to today. So I came in to get this meeting done and let them hear our side. And why are we standing up against this pipeline? What is the root cause? And it's important for you as a decision maker to understand why there is a movement, why we are standing up, so you can respond. But
they canceled
it never
this.
happened.
Last year, Energy Transfer Partners CEO Kelsey Warren predicted the pipeline will go forward under a Trump administration. This is Warren speaking in November to Mark Albert of CBS News.
Once he takes over January 20th, what are the prospects?
Oh, it's 100%.
100% that
the easement gets granted and the pipeline gets built.
Have you spoken to Donald Trump about the pipeline?
I've never met the man.
You've never met him?
No.
But he's invested in you and you're invested in him.
Well, I wish him well.
It doesn't help the United States if it leaks, right? It doesn't help the people who live downstream.
I'm not going to win that argument with you because pipelines do leak. It's rare. I think the chances of this pipeline leaking is extremely remote.
You think all the protesters are going to go away once you're done?
Absolutely. What is there to protest?
They are determined to stop your project.
They will not stop our project. That's naive. They're not stopping our project.
That's Kelsey Warren, the CEO of Energy Transfer Partners, which owns the Dakota Access Pipeline. Chairman Dave Archambault, you write in your letter response, if DAPL is successful in constructing and operating the pipeline, the tribe will seek to shut the pipeline operations down. He says you won't stop it. What do you say?
See, Amy, what is unfortunate is that when I visited with Kelsey Warren and I shared with him why we are concerned and all the wrongs that took place to our people, he agreed that this pipeline should not go there. This pipeline should not be there. And if he knew the information prior to any of the scoping, he would have rerouted it. So he knows and he understands why we resist this, and he has, he understood that we are going to move forward with our resistance, and we're gonna with the Obama administration, we're going to do whatever we can. And we're going to do whatever we can with this new administration. And our only chance now is to go through court with them, with the decision that Donald Trump's doing. So we understand that the court system has never been favorable for the tribes, but we got to do something. And we know we have a lot of support from around the nation, from around the world, and we're thankful for that support. And we're going to keep pushing forward. We're going to keep fighting this thing. It's not over until it's over. And so
a Native Nations March, the tribe put out in the statement, your statement, a Native Nations March on Washington is scheduled for March 10th. What are the plans?
Well, I think this march is very important because we need to start focusing on more, because I believe that Donald Trump is going to start attacking all of our rights, all of our treaty rights. Not just this one pipeline is going to be the issue. We're going to have to start battling for our law enforcement, our education, our health care. All of these things are going to be under attack. So having this march is building awareness for this nation that our indigenous people are still here, and we're not going anywhere, and we're going to be here, and we are the first occupants of these lands. We are the ones who. Like President Trump is having this issue with immigrants. He's an immigrant himself. He's occupying our lands, and he's breaking the rules and the laws, the federal laws that keep people safe. So we need to build awareness about that, and we need to come to D.C. and let the world know who are the first occupants, and that we are not going anywhere, and we're going to be here for the next 4 years. If not sooner, this president is not good for this nation.
You have been arrested protesting the Dakota Access Pipeline, arrested for civil disobedience. Do you plan to do that again?
I felt that what I encourage is nonviolence. What I say is I don't think violence is necessary, and I did get arrested, and from that time, I said that one arrest is a lot. One arrest is enough, and I don't think it's necessary. We did make enough noise. This movement is louder than ever before. Louder than anyone anticipated, and I'm thankful for all the support that came, and it's something that. We never anticipated. Now, because of this movement, we have to take the lessons that were given to us at that time when it was healthy. And so we're going to continue to thank our allies and encourage them to march on their capitals, to go to their state Congress representatives and ask them to listen to the tribal nations. We got to keep making sure that this noise, this momentum that we have is still there, and it could go away in a whim if we're not strategic about our next steps. So one of the other things is to continue the divestment. The things that happen in Seattle, those are exactly what has to happen. If we know that the Koch brothers are running this nation, then we have to encourage anyone and everyone we know, we need to take our nation back and divest from these types of organizations, these types of countries, or these corporations who are feeding lawmakers, or feeding the President of the United States.
Dave Archambault, we want to thank you for being with us, Chairman of the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe. We're going to continue this conversation when we come back from break with Standing Rock Sioux member Chase Iron Eyes and Indigenous leader Dallas Goldtooth. Stay with us.
What a time to be alive. What a time to be alive. The revolution has come. What a time to be alive. What a time to be alive. When we stand up, we already won. What a time to be alive. What a time to be alive. The revolution has come. What a time to be alive. When we stand up, we've already won. People all over the world are standing up, saying we ain't gonna take it no more. Speak truth to power, a change gonna come. This we know for sure.
The Revolution Has Come by Reverend Sekou and the Holy Ghost. This is Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman as we continue our conversation about the fight against the $3.8 billion Dakota Access Pipeline. On Tuesday, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers said it will green light the final phase of construction of the pipeline. Amnesty International called the announcement an unlawful and appalling violation of human rights. In recent months, police have launched an escalating and violent crackdown against the resistance at Standing Rock. Last week, more than 70 people were arrested after militarized police raided a new resistance camp set up on historic Sioux Treaty land. Among those arrested was award-winning Pueblo journalist Jenny Monet, who was on assignment for Indian Country Media Today. For more, we're joined by two guests. In Chicago, Dallas Goldtooth is with us, organizer with Indigenous Environmental Network. And in Vancouver, we're joined by Standing Rock Sioux member Chase Iron Eyes, who was also arrested this past week during the raid. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Chase Iron Eyes, with this news that the easement will be granted for the final building of the pipeline under the Missouri River, your response?
I think it's something that we expected all along. It rings true, and it vindicates those of us who on December 4th declared that the denial of the easement by the Obama administration was a hollow and meaningless victory. And now the Trump administration is making it very clear that they intend to destroy our only drinking water resource on the Standing Rock Nation and for the 10 million people who live south of the proposed pipeline. Drilling can begin any minute, and we are looking at the potential of an armed raid or a forcible raid after February 22nd, when the Army Corps said that they would declare us trespassers on our own land, the same as the United States Army said they would declare us hostile if we didn't return to the reservations in 1875.
So what are your plans?
Well, right now there are probably 400 to 500 people, water protectors north of the 1889 boundary. That was the result of an illegal annexation of treaty territory by the United States against not just the Standing Rock Nation, but the entire Lakota Nation and members of the Great Sioux Nation, the Oceti-Sakowin. And so other tribal governments are weighing in and supporting a fight on the ground, as they have a right to do. There are 400 to 500 people north of the Cannonball River, in the contested zone, in the treaty zone, in the place where, according to the United States Army Corps of Engineers, we are not supposed to be, and they are going to stand their ground. There are already people en route to join this peaceful, prayerful, nonviolent exercise of our human, treaty, constitutional, and civil rights, which are at stake, which are constantly being encroached upon by what seems to be Trump tyranny. We talk about the arrests. The arrests are above 700 in number. This includes journalists, including yourself, Amy. It includes the brutalizations of a young woman named Sophia Wolanski. It includes the loss of eyesight of another young lady. It includes the permanent maiming by at close range deployment of less lethal bullets. It includes dog attacks. It includes water cannons in sub-freezing temperatures, the negligent or intentional risking of human lives. It includes the lying, the Morton County law enforcement agencies lying about their criminal conduct. And so there is a lot happening. There's a lot that they need to be held accountable for. And not only are people north of the Cannonball River, but there are people on the Standing Rock Reservation already on the ground. I know that there is a difference of opinion, but we stand united with the Standing Rock Nation in wanting the most highly militarized blockade in North Dakota history to be lifted, because it's functioning as a successful economic sanction. It's the equivalent of when they withheld rations from our people, when we would not agree to the dictates of the United States government and the agents at that time. They would just, the hand that feeds you is the hand that can starve you.
I want to bring in,
that's what's happening right now.
I want to bring in Dallas Goldtooth of the Indigenous Environmental Network, who's joining us from Chicago. Dallas, can you talk about the protests that are happening, the Seattle Council saying they would divest from Wells Fargo, and other actions that are taking place now, your plans?
Well, thank you very much for Amy for having me on. And first and foremost, I want to say, send acknowledgement and appreciation to our Indigenous women and youth who have been leading this effort, who may not be necessarily reflected in these interviews, but they are truly the backbone of this movement and have been leading us through this entire process. You know, what started out as literally 20 to 30 people in the middle of the prairie and this grassroots fight against this this multi-billion-dollar corporation has culminated into what just happened the other day in Seattle, where the city made the announcement that they are going to divest over $3 billion out of this company, or out of Wells Fargo, who funds this company. I think that it shows you the power of unified action. It shows the power of mobilization, and it shows the power of us as the people and what we can do when we really put our energy and focus on building a better, sustainable world. And so that right now we have a call to action across the planet, and specifically on Turtle Island, also known as so-called North America, for people to take to the streets, to rise up and rise with Standing Rock and mass mobilization to support this effort and this fight against the abrogation of Indigenous rights, the complete disregard for the law of the land. So we have actions happening in Washington, D.C. Later on this afternoon. We're going to be having actions in Seattle, L.A., San Francisco, Denver, Albuquerque, New York City. And folks that really want to follow along with that, they can check out the everydayofaction.org. It's an action hub that a lot of the indigenous groups who have been fighting and who have been on the ground in Standing Rock created, so people have a centralized place for information about solidarity actions happening across this country. So that's everydayofaction.org. And that's where the point of all of this.
We have 5 seconds.
We're fighting against a system here, and so we need to do it together. We have to rise up together.
Of course.
In order to
We will continue to follow this. I know, Dallas, you're flying to Washington, D.C. for that action today. Dallas Goldtooth with an Indigenous Environmental Network of the Dakota and Diné people, Chase Iron Eyes with Lakota People's Law Project, and Standing Rock Sioux Tribe in North Dakota. That does it for our show. Democracy Now! Produced by Mike Burke, Nermeen Sheikh, Carla Wells, Laura Gaddis, Dina Guzder. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks so much for joining us.